I remember the exact moment I stopped feeling like a wife and started feeling like a tenant in my own life. It wasn't the morning Warren had his stroke. It wasn't the 3 days I sat in that hospital waiting room, drinking bad coffee and listening to the machines breathe for him. It wasn't even the afternoon the doctor came out and told me his brain had been without oxygen too long, that we needed to talk about what comes next. It was 6 days after we buried him when I found the key. I wasn't looking for anything. I was moving his winter coat from the front closet to the guest room, just trying to organize, just trying to do something with my hands so I didn't have to sit still. And when I put my hand into his left pocket, I felt it. Small, brass, on a plain ring with nothing else attached to it. Not a house key, not a car key, something smaller, something I didn't recognize. I stood in the hallway for a long time, turning it over in my fingers. Warren and I had been married for 34 years. We met at a church social in Dayton when I was 29 and he was 32. He was handsome in a quiet way, steady, the kind of man who showed up on time and kept his word. My mother loved him immediately. My sister said he seemed serious, and she meant it as a compliment. We married 11 months later and moved into the house on Clearfield Drive, where we raised 2 children, where I planted a garden every spring for 3 decades, where I thought I knew every corner and drawer and shadow. I thought I knew the garage, too. He had a filing cabinet out there, a heavy, dark green metal one, pushed against the far wall behind the shelving unit with the paint cans and the old garden tools. 4 drawers. The bottom 2 were always open. I'd been in them myself over the years, looking for warranty information or old tax returns. The top 2 were always locked. I had asked him about it once, early in our marriage, and he said it was work stuff, sensitive documents from clients. He was an insurance adjuster for most of his career. I accepted that the way I accepted most things, Warren told me. He was a private person. I respected that. I thought I did. Anyway, I stood in the hallway holding that key, and I looked toward the door to the garage. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't grief. The grief had been there, somewhere underneath. But what I felt standing there was something I can only describe as a held breath, like a part of me had been waiting, without ever knowing it, for exactly this moment. I walked out to the garage. The key fit the top drawer. I want you to understand that I didn't expect anything dramatic. I thought maybe old client files, maybe something from the years before we met that he'd never gotten around to throwing away. I pulled the drawer open and the smell hit me first: old paper, dust, the particular staleness of things that have been sealed away for a long time. There were folders, dozens of them, hanging neatly in color-coded tabs, labeled in Warren's careful block handwriting. The first one I pulled out had my name on it. Not our name, not our finances, my name. Just my first name, written on the tab like I was a file. Inside were papers going back to 1994. Doctor's notes. Not copies of my records notes that Warren had taken himself, in his own handwriting, about my health. Dates, symptoms, what I had complained about, what I had eaten, how much I had slept. Pages of it, covering 30 years. And beside his notes, in some cases, were letters he had written to my doctors. Letters I had never seen, had never been told about, had never consented to. Letters describing me as forgetful, anxious, unreliable. In my own reporting of symptoms, I sat down on the garage floor. I need to back up because I want you to understand something about our marriage that I didn't understand myself until I was sitting on that cold concrete floor reading 30 years of my own life written in someone else's handwriting. Warren was never cruel to me. That is the thing that makes this so difficult to explain and so difficult for other people to understand when I try. He never raised his voice. He was never violent. He was, by every measure that most people use, a good husband. He worked hard. He provided for us. He was polite at dinner parties and remembered birthdays and fixed things when they broke around the house. But he drove me to every doctor's appointment for the last 20 years. He came into the exam room with me. He said it was because he wanted to be supportive, and I believed him. And I was grateful, the way you're grateful for something that doesn't quite feel right but that you can't find the words to object to. In the room, he would answer questions before I had the chance to. He would say things like, "She tends to catastrophize," or "She has a lot of anxiety about her health." And the doctors would nod and look at me with a particular kind of patience, and I would feel, I understand this now, I would feel smaller. I would feel less certain of what I had walked in there to say. I hadn't driven myself anywhere in almost 15 years. He said it was because my anxiety made it hard on me. I had started to believe that. I hadn't believed it in the beginning, but over time, the way water shapes stone, I had come to think of myself as someone who needed to be driven places, someone who needed to be spoken for, someone who got confused about details and needed a steadier hand nearby. That steadier hand was always Warren's. I sat on the garage floor and I read the folder with my name on it, and I felt something shifting in my chest, slow and enormous, like a glacier deciding to move. Then I opened the second folder. It was labeled with the name of a bank I didn't recognize. Inside were statements going back to 2003, an account in Warren's name only, in a town 2 hours from where we lived. Over 22 years, the balance had grown to just over $190,000. Small deposits, regular, consistent. Never large enough to notice. The kind of amounts that disappear into the ordinary noise of a household budget. I am not a foolish woman. I was a school librarian for 26 years. I read. I pay attention. I helped 2 children with their homework at this kitchen table, talked them through critical thinking, told them to always ask where information comes from and whether it can be verified. I thought I was a person who noticed things. I had not noticed this. I kept going. The second drawer held more folders. A P.O. box registered in a town I'd never been to. Correspondence printed emails, actual letters in envelopes with a woman whose name I didn't know, spanning at least a decade. I am not going to describe what was in those letters in detail, because some of it is still too raw, and some of it is not relevant to what I want you to understand. What I want you to understand is what was in the last folder in the second drawer. The one labeled in Warren's handwriting with the word contingency. Inside was a document, a trust he had set up in 2011. The house on Clearfield Drive, the savings accounts I knew about, the investment portfolio we had built together over decades, all of it had been transferred, quietly and legally, into a trust that named his brother as the successor trustee. Not me, not our children. His brother, whom I had always found cold and who had, I now understood, known about this for 15 years. I closed the drawer. I went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and I called my daughter. I need to tell you about my children, because the people who love you are always part of these stories, and they don't always get enough space in the telling of them. My daughter, Renee, is 41. She lives in Columbus with her husband and my 2 grandchildren. My son, Daniel, is 38 and lives outside of Nashville. Both of them loved their father. Both of them are going to have to carry a complicated grief now, and that is something I think about every day. The way that what I found in that garage didn't just change my understanding of my marriage, it changed the ground under all of us. When Renee answered the phone, I didn't know how to start. I sat at the table where we had eaten 34 years of dinners, and I said, "I found something in the garage. I need you to come." She came the next morning. She brought Daniel on a video call from his truck in a parking lot in Nashville. I put the folders on the table, one at a time, and I watched my daughter's face go through every stage of something I didn't have a name for yet. She said, "Mom, did you know any of this?" I told her the truth. I said, "I knew something felt wrong for a very long time. I just didn't know what it was called." That is the sentence I keep coming back to. Because that is the thing about this kind of slow, quiet, hidden control. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't leave marks that anyone can see, including you. It builds itself into the ordinary architecture of your days so gradually that by the time you're living inside it, it feels like the walls. You don't question the walls. You just live in the house. I had lived in that house for 34 years. Renee stayed for 2 weeks. She helped me find an attorney, a woman named Patricia who specializes in estate law, and who, when I laid out everything I had found, sat across her desk and said, very steadily, "This is more common than most people know, and we are going to work through all of it." Those words, "we are going to work through all of it," were the first words anyone had said to me in a very long time that didn't have any edges hidden in them. I want to tell you what the next 8 months looked like, because I think people deserve to know that the resolution is not a single moment. It is not the courtroom scene you might imagine. It is paper. It is phone calls. It is sitting at a desk you never used to sit at because he always handled the paperwork, trying to teach yourself the language of accounts and trustees and probate and letters of administration. It is learning things at 63 that most adults know at 30, and realizing the reason you don't know them is not because you weren't capable. You were always capable, but because someone had, carefully, systematically, kept you away from them. I found things I hadn't known in 34 years of marriage. I found that my name had been quietly removed from the deed on our house in 2008 during a refinance and never put back. Warren had told me I didn't need to come to the closing, that it was just routine paperwork, that he would handle it. I had stayed home. I had probably made dinner. I found that the credit card in my own name, the one I thought was mine, that I used for groceries and household things, had Warren listed as the primary account holder and me as an authorized user, which meant that when he died, the credit card company could, and did, close the account. I was 63 years old, and I had to build credit from scratch, like a person just starting out. I found that my medical records, going back 2 decades, contained notations from Warren's letters that I had never known about. A doctor I had trusted for 12 years had a letter in my file, written by my husband, that described me as having poor insight into my own health and a tendency toward hypochondria. I had seen that doctor for 12 years and never once felt that she truly listened to me. I understand now why. I had been pre-described. I found all of this, and I want you to know that finding it did not destroy me. I think people expect I would have expected once that uncovering something like this would be like a building falling down, and in some ways it was. But there's something strange that happens when you finally name a thing that has been living in your house, unnamed, for decades. It loses some of its power, not all of it, and not quickly, but some, because you understand that the confusion you felt, the smallness, the constant low-grade uncertainty about your own perceptions, that wasn't you, that was something that was done to you. And the part of you that always suspected something was wrong, that always felt the edges of something you couldn't quite see, that part was right. That part was working perfectly the whole time. My sister called me 3 months after I found the cabinet. We'd grown distant over the years. Warren had never been warm toward her, and I see now the ways in which that distance had been cultivated rather than grown naturally. She called to check on me, and instead we talked for 4 hours. She told me she had never said anything because she'd had nothing concrete to point to, just a feeling. Just the way I seemed to change, slowly, over the years. The way I stopped having opinions in front of him. The way I would look at him before answering questions. "I thought you were just becoming more like him," she said. "I didn't know there was a name for it. There is a name for it. I know that now. It is called coercive control. And it doesn't require a single act of violence to be real, and it can happen in a house where the lawn is mowed on Saturdays, and the Christmas cards go out on time, and the neighbors think you have a very nice marriage." Renee found a therapist for me. She had to talk me into it. I had some old resistance to the idea. The kind of resistance that I now understand was partly trained into me. The message that I was not reliable enough in my own perceptions to trust what I said in a room by myself. My therapist is a woman about 15 years younger than me, and in our first session, she said something I have thought about almost every day since. She said, "The fact that you didn't cry right away doesn't mean you didn't love him. It means part of you already knew something was wrong, and part of you had already been grieving for a very long time." I think that's true. I think I had been grieving, quietly, for years, grieving the person I had been before I got so small, grieving the confidence I used to have, grieving the version of my marriage that I had needed it to be. When Warren died, some of that grief had already been done. The legal process took the better part of a year. Patricia was patient and thorough. The trust was contested, and the outcome involved the kind of complicated negotiations that I still don't fully understand, and that I am grateful every day I did not have to navigate alone. What I can tell you is that by last April, the house on Clearfield Drive was in my name. The accounts were accessible. The credit was rebuilding. The filing cabinet after Patricia and I went through every folder together, documented everything, and made the copies she needed was emptied and taken to the curb. I watched the garbage truck take it on a Tuesday morning. I stood on the front porch with my coffee, and I watched it go, and I felt something I don't have a perfect word for. Not joy exactly. Not relief exactly. Something quieter than both of those. Something like standing up straight after a very long time of bending. Daniel came up from Nashville in June. He and Renee and I sat in the backyard on a warm evening, and we talked for a long time about all of it. About what they remembered, about what they hadn't understood, about the ways it had shaped them, too, in ways they were only beginning to see. Daniel said he had spent his whole life trying to be less emotional than he was because Warren had always treated emotion as a kind of weakness, and he was only now, at 38, beginning to unlearn that. Renee said she had always felt, without being able to say why, that her mother was less present in her own life than most people's mothers were. She hadn't had words for it either. We are all in the process of finding words. I am still in the house on Clearfield Drive. People ask me sometimes if I thought about selling it, and I understand why they ask. There is a version of this story where the house is a symbol of the wrong things, and walking away from it is the empowering choice. But I have lived here for 34 years. I planted the roses along the back fence. I know every sound the floors make at night. My grandchildren sleep in the room that used to be Renee's when they visit. The house is not the problem. The house is mine. I have started driving myself again. It sounds like such a small thing, and it is the biggest thing. The first time driving to the pharmacy, 3 months after Warren died, alone in the car for the first time in I don't know how long, I cried in the parking lot before I went inside. Not from sadness, from something else. From the memory of having been someone who drove herself places. From the recognition that that person had always been there, waiting inside all those years of being told she couldn't manage. I have started talking to my doctor alone. I made an appointment, and I sat in the exam room. And when the nurse asked me to describe what I was there for, I described it. In my own words, without anyone in the room to correct me. It was one of the most quietly revolutionary moments of my life. I want to say one more thing, because I said I wanted to be honest, and this is the most honest part. There were signs, not obvious ones, not the kind that are easy to see from inside a life you're living. But there were moments over the years when I felt the edges of something I couldn't name, moments when I disagreed with something, and then, a few weeks later, couldn't quite remember why I had disagreed, only that I must have been wrong. Moments when a friend said something about my marriage and I felt a flash of something I immediately swallowed. Moments when I was alone in the house and felt, inexplicably, more like myself than I did the rest of the time. I want to say to anyone who is living in those moments That feeling is information. That small, persistent sense that something is not right, that is not anxiety, that is not you catastrophizing. That is not unreliability or confusion or poor insight into your own experience. That is you, working correctly, trying to tell you something. I didn't listen for a long time. I listened to other things instead. Voices that were steadier and more certain and right there beside me. And I became someone who needed to be told, rather than someone who knew. I am becoming, slowly, someone who knows again. The garden is coming in well this spring. I replanted the back beds, took out what had been there, and started over with things I chose myself. Lavender along the fence because I've always loved it, and Warren thought it was too messy. A fig tree in the corner that my sister helped me plant on a Saturday in March. Tomatoes, because my grandchildren will eat them right off the vine in August, and there is nothing in the world like watching a child eat something out of a garden. I am 63 years old. I have 2 children who are learning, alongside me, how to understand something that none of us had the vocabulary for before. I have a sister I talk to almost every day. I have a therapist I see on Tuesday afternoons. I have a lawyer who called me last month just to check in. Not about anything legal, just to ask how I was doing. I have a house that is mine. I am not telling you this story because I want sympathy, though I understand if that's what it stirs. I am telling you this story because I spent 34 years feeling like something was wrong without being able to say what it was, and I want anyone who has that feeling, that quiet, persistent, impossible to articulate sense that you have been slowly made smaller, to know that the feeling is real, that you are not imagining it, that it is possible to open the drawer and find the words and stand up. I think about the key sometimes, that small brass key in the coat pocket. How many times had he worn that coat with me standing right there? How many times had the key been in the pocket and I hadn't known to look? I found it because I was alone. I found it because I was doing something ordinary and unhurried and quiet, with no one in the room to answer for me, or redirect me, or tell me I was reading too much into things. I keep the key in a dish on the kitchen windowsill now, not as a reminder of him, as a reminder that I found it, that when I was finally alone in the hallway with my own hand in a pocket, I knew immediately that something needed to be opened. It took me 63 years to get good at listening to myself. I am not going to waste a single minute of whatever comes next.